All right, Nicole. Well, thanks for joining me today. To get started, tell me a little bit about yourself.
A little bit about myself. Good question. So I am currently the head of talent acquisition for Paymentology, a global FinTech. Before that, I owned my own company and worked with many different companies around the world, which I love doing on a variety of projects, from people ops to talent acquisition to kind of international workforce, etc. And I love the international side of things, so that's probably where you find me most. And the remote workspace, very close and dear to my heart. So that's kind of who I am as a person. Yeah.
And what made you make the leap from your own consulting business to working full time at Paymentology?
Good question. So I decided after probably a little bit of a negative experience many years ago in the workforce that my own business was much better than being employed. So I went for that and I truly enjoyed it. But what I really miss from the consultancy side is that you implement something or you design something really awesome. You work with great people, but you can never see it done. You can never see it emerge and kind of fully see what's actually being or the outcome of something. And that's why I decided, okay, well, if I really find a company that really aligns to who I am, my ethics, my values, then I can stay a little bit longer. And that's why I kind of end up with Paymentology.
And when did you join the company?
It's probably about 2 years ago, full time. Before that, on a consultancy basis.
Got it. All right. And tell me a little bit about the business.
Interesting as well, because we're really kind of moving forward in a very kind of global space. We focus on payment processing for fintechs, but also digital banks, and that's kind of the space that is really exciting for many of us. We work around the world. We have teams 24/7 working, kind of following the sun model. So currently we have about 68 nationalities in the company. We focus on remote work first, although we do have hybrids. So we do have three kind of entities in Johannesburg, Dubai, and London. But everybody kind of works remotely, and that's kind of who we are as a company and who we want
Yeah,
to stay as a company as well.
that's incredible. Well, that is truly a global organization if I've ever heard of one. 68 different countries, people all over the world. How many employees are there?
So we have around 500 team members, and we're growing slowly but steadily.
Got it. And tell me about the makeup of your team. What are the different roles on the talent acquisition side?
Yeah, so I have 7 people currently. We downscaled a little bit. So we have an international team from Thailand to Kenya to Portugal to Romania to Peru. So we're all over the show, and we cover many different regions. And we have the tech space where we have like some hardcore tech recruiters, as well as the business frontline space where we have global recruiters, but they could also cover parts of, if necessary, within the people team and the people ops team. So that's kind of how we're split up. We're going more to a generalist kind of model from the TA side. So in case of economic changes, that we can actually place people in and work on have them work on other projects as well. So I think that's really exciting from our perspective. Over the past 2 years, we hardcore skilled. We did about probably over 180 people and roles across the world in a variety of ways. And we're pretty good actually from the tech side. We don't have too many issues in getting people in. And we don't have to work, we have to work hard, but we don't have to do all these amazing things that you see going on. People just kind of appear to us because we're very creative in what we do. And I think that's the creativity part that's kind of worked for our team a lot. If it means digging through the sand, that works really well for us. So I think from that space, if you look from a LinkedIn hardcore sourcing perspective, it doesn't always work out for us. It actually works better for us to really align to our kind of creative ways of either locally, whether that's in Vietnam, Thailand, or South Africa, or whether that's kind of more on a remote space perspective.
Interesting. So tell me a little bit more about that. What are you guys doing on the creative side to attract those local candidates?
Yeah, so a lot of the community spaces work very well for us. So whether that's kind of a Slack community group, or whether that's like a meetup, or whether that's specific like startup spaces, those really, really work well for us. The referral space as well. We always need payment professionals. They're not that many across the world, so it's already a small community you're hitting. So that works well for us as well. I think some of the traditional parts as well, like hardcore job boards in particular countries, and we know now which job boards work and which don't, and they actually really work for us. We don't have to do a lot of hard work for that. And what we've noticed as well is it's a little bit about the philosophy from a company that you take as well, right? So do you take the hardcore sourcing route, or do you actually want people to really work for you and as a company? And to be honest, from a Paymentology perspective, we really noticed that, direct applications work a lot better. Those team members or new hires stay with us a lot longer than actually sourced candidates. So I think that's also really important. That aligns to our kind of our creative space and the way we work and direct ourselves.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. I think, companies are seeing that on the go-to-market side as well, as it's not all about now the cold prospecting and sourcing and reaching out to folks. And you obviously have to have some of that motion stood up within the business. But it's more about how can we pull people into our orbit? How do we put content out there, and how do we engage in communities to get candidates engaged into our process and applying to our jobs and raising their hand that they want to work here versus, having to pull people cold and more or less sell them on wanting to work for the business. So that's definitely a theme that I feel like I've seen with a lot of folks in the talent acquisition space. So great that you guys are ahead of the curve there. I saw that you guys were recently rated as one of the top 100 remote employers, which, as you mentioned, is something that you and the company seem very passionate about. Curious, what types of challenges that presents for you, but also what advantages that presents for you from a recruiting perspective.
Yeah, I think from the business perspective is, of course, it's the time zone difference, right? So if I'm a team lead and I have 7 or 12 different team members in 3 or 4 different time zones, that means that you do have to be flexible. You can't do a 9 to 5. And that sometimes doesn't align to, people's personal kind of spaces and boundaries. So that's one of the things that we do have to be careful from a remote work perspective. I think from a TA perspective, it just opens up the world in terms of, the world is your oyster in terms of talent. So where do you actually want to get the talent from? And I'm not always talking about kind of the geographical compensation part, but it's like certain countries are very, very good for certain tech skills, and you can hit those countries a lot better with remote work than you can actually with local sources. So that kind of is our game, and we're very kind of good at that game in terms of looking at local talent. So one of the insights now is, we're looking into a lot of like Turkey. Turkey is a very interesting country now in terms of great talent. Does everybody look into or country like Turkey? Probably not, right? Maybe Latvia, Brazil, very good from the tech space, but the US has now also seen that. So for us, the talent dries up a little bit, and we look for maybe somewhere in Ecuador. So I think the world becomes a playground in terms of where you get the talent, and also the diversity from a value perspective. You learn so much from one another. Of course, there's challenges as well. Everybody comes from a very different cultural background, and that doesn't always mean the country, but the cultures one brings from home as well. And that's probably sometimes where you do see some of the challenges within an internal workforce. But I think the way we work, that's how we got into where we are very quickly. So it's not new to us, and it was also not new to us when the pandemic hit. Only our 3 office locations would have had to go remote, but everybody else was already remote. So it's very easy to adapt to that then.
That's great. So that gives you a leg up over a lot of companies. I mean, even like us that went remote first during the pandemic, and we were previously all in one office, everybody there, everybody lives in the same area, 9 to 5 in the office, and then immediately had to switch. So I'm sure that was somewhat of a competitive advantage for you guys operationally within the business, but also from a recruiting standpoint, to be able to tell candidates that this is how you've been running things, for years. It gives them comfort in A, that you can run an organization that way. But also B, I think, at some point in the pandemic when folks were joining companies that were remote because of the pandemic, it's like, well, what's the culture and what's the environment going to be like after the pandemic? But for you guys, global distributed remote team was just ingrained in your culture from the start. So that's awesome. I saw it on your careers page, which I thought was great. And I always encourage everybody to give an outline of the hiring process and the general steps so a candidate knows what to expect before they even apply. But can you take me through what those steps look like? And I understand it could be different, across different roles, but generally, what does the hiring process look like at Paymentology?
Yeah, so interesting. It's a little bit different for each role, but overall, we have a particular kind of workflow that we work with. So we would have kind of the applications come in, right? Then one of the recruiters, whether in the business frontline team or the tech team, they would have their first interview. At that time, we would also actually send a personality profile adapted for Paymentology, a lot aligned to kind of value-based recruitment. Then we would move on to a hiring manager or technical interview. There might be another stage in between, depending on if a team actually wants to meet the person first. But then we would always have, and we're probably a little bit specific in that, we would always have a project. So we use a particular software tool, use CandyTech for that. And everybody actually does a project. So that project is usually between the 2 and 4 hours of work. We do actually give a gift card for that. So I do want to say people do receive something for their hard work. And in that project, it could be very specific to the role. It could be, build a presentation or do some hardcore coding. It could be very creative. It might have a video question in that as well. And then we would move on to a project presentation, and there will always be 2 or 3 team members in the project presentation. And it's very informal conversation about their project, whether they present something or they work through their code. And from there on, we go straight into kind of offer. So it is quite a lengthy process, and we're very aware of that, but it really works for us, and that's why we keep it that. But we're also very respectful of the candidate's time and effort as well. So we always try to follow up with actual feedback call as soon as they've done a little bit more work. So on the project presentation as well as the project kind of review stages. Yeah, so that's kind of our workflow at the moment, and we adapt it as we go along, really.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, definitely very thorough. It sounds like you're really evaluating candidates from all angles. You got the behavioral personality side, you've got the skills side, you've got, live interviews with hiring managers. Maybe it's a technical interview. So you're definitely getting a full picture of the candidate and their qualifications for the role. So I imagine quality ends up being really high. But with such a thorough process, how do you ensure, like with all these different steps, that you're still moving along at a pace that allows you to make sure that, candidates aren't getting, swooped up by another employer before you're able to run to the end of your process?
And that's a challenge, right? And for certain roles, we do have whereby the percentages are a lot higher in terms of drop-off rate, and drop-off rate in terms of they receive a different offer. We don't have people actually really dropping out of the process, which is really amazing, actually. And I think that's our effort on the candidate experience side. We really want their buy-in. We really value who they are as people. But we do have people who drop off, and mainly because of the office space. And I would say probably more on the specialist high tech side, where we would have some of them. But we have such a number coming in already as well that we're actually covered by having this process. Now, if we would have a kind of a brain drain in terms of candidates are just not available in certain places again, we would need to adapt. And we're very flexible, and our ATS also allows us to adapt very quickly to that. But in case of that adaptation, that's also a conversation we would have with the hiring team. Are you, do you actually want that extra team interview, or can we cut it out, please? Because we're going to lose people otherwise. So it's a close collaboration with our hiring teams as well.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, there has to be a balance, right? If you've got a full pipeline, you have a ton of candidates come through, and you want to run a really thorough process to ensure quality is there at the end, you're probably okay with some drop off from candidates that are, going to other employers along the way, because you have such a high number of candidates coming in the beginning. But as you said, as a talent acquisition team, you have to be adaptable, and you have to work with your hiring managers, because of the pipeline, the pipeline for every job is not going to be the same. And so if you're seeing a smaller number of candidates, you have to find that balance between speed and quality to make sure that at the end of the day, you find a really, really solid hire, but you find a hire nonetheless, because the business needs that person in order to accomplish what it's aiming to accomplish. So it's great that you guys have that flexibility and adaptability built into your process. Now, you've got 7 people on the talent acquisition team. You've got 500 people in the company. You're spread across 68 countries. I imagine your TA team is supporting a wide variety of hiring managers. How do you keep everyone on the same page so that process can flow smoothly?
Very good. And one of the challenges we face, especially the time zone element, right, that comes into with hiring managers all across. I think we're at a stage now that we have a lot more buy-in with the hiring teams. It has taken some time to create that, but each recruiter really works together and has ownership and accountability for working with those hiring teams. And I think that's probably also a little bit of the changes that we've made over the past 2 years in terms of where it may have come into me first, where now actually the recruiters just have their own space, and they can create and work with those hiring teams. It's a challenge as well in terms of, okay, how do we keep everybody on the same space. I think a lot of it is also with hiring team trainings. We do quite a number of trainings, and we actually have a full schedule going on from September onwards, where we have more and more people coming in, team members coming in into the kind of our talent space, and doing a lot of different trainings on different, like interview skilling, advanced interview skilling, non-bias training, neurodiversity training. So we're really hitting it now. And by doing that, we really also get their buy-in, but also the collaborative spirit, right? So they know what they want in their teams. They're the experts, but please, work with us because we're not that expert. And I think that's also knowing where your skills, your strengths stop and where somebody else's strengths start and kind of combining that. I think that's probably what we're getting better and better at. But it's a challenge, Josh, it is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can only imagine, especially in just such a distributed environment, like you said, with the time zones of like just being on the same page about where you're at in the hiring process and did this person do what they need to do and are things moving along? What does this person think about the candidate? That's a challenge in just a normal talent acquisition environment. But, I'd say you guys have a rather complex one just because of the global organization that you're supporting. So really impressive that you're able to keep everyone on the same page in that way. Do you find that the trainings that you guys are running gets hiring managers more bought into the process and to working with your recruitment team?
Yes, especially so for example, we're very specific. Nobody can come into our ATS without 1.5 hour training. And that's a lot of effort on the hiring team part. In some hiring teams, we actually have, the engineering team. We have about 50 people as part of actually our hiring team. So that means 50 people having gone through 1.5 hour training. But what that allows for is a very quick paced through in terms of what we need to get done. So everybody has their kind of tasks, and that kind of helps push kind of candidates through the pipeline very quickly. Those trainings really, really help and solidify what we want from a company perspective, and also gives us a lot more direction and collaboration with everyone, and also feedback, right? It's not always on us. We can provide get feedback as well and really help push our side forward, because we can learn and develop and get better at things as well.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, I think it almost sounds like you've got the training is like a mini hiring certification program, right? It's like we can't help you hire, you can't be in the ATS until we make sure we're on the same page and we have the same, you're bought into the hiring philosophy and the way we go about things. That way, once we do have to hire for a role for you, we can sprint into that process full steam ahead versus having to manage the hiring manager on, almost on like training wheels, right? On like riding a bike. And I think that's the difference when you preload this information to hiring managers. Back to the biking analogy, you get them to be able to ride the bike when the hiring process starts versus riding a tricycle, and it's like the recruiter has to nudge that person along the way and kind of manage expectations along the way. So I'm sure, you see that play out in just the performance of the hiring process as a result of that training.
It is, and everybody's aligned, and there's standardization also from a legal perspective, right? So that's really where that's our next step, is really, okay, how are we aligned from the compliance, the legal side, and this really helps that as well, because not every country has the same compliance needs. So a recruiter from a certain country may see certain things culturally very different as a recruiter from another country, and a hiring manager the same. So it's okay, with kind of this standardization across, okay, this is what we actually do as a team, and this is our kind of our philosophy. We will not allow anybody in unless they have had training. That really ticks off a lot of these boxes as well. But also, again, is that collaboration, is they meet the team, they know who we are, and we're not kind of strangers to them. So I think that's kind of what really works for us. But it's a lot of effort and and commitment on everybody's part.
For sure, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that, you're not only training, but you're coordinating the training for, making sure it's getting done, answering any questions, all of the above. But I think by doing that, one, you're setting the expectation with hiring managers that, hey, the hiring process is going to be a collaborative process, and we need and want you as part of that process. Therefore, we are highly invested in your upskilling as a hiring manager and your success as a hiring manager to hire the people that you need for your team. So I feel like by doing that training up front versus, I think a lot of teams just do it kind of randomly either throughout the year or they try and, bake it into like the hiring manager kickoff meeting where they try and level set and get the hiring manager up to speed. By doing it up front, you've already set the bar and you've already laid the foundation. So once we go in to hire for a role, once a rec has been approved, we just start moving and everybody, the expectations have already been set.
Yeah. So the next step is to have this actually as part of the onboarding, kind of the onboarding process. So if somebody is highlighted as a hiring manager or a hiring team member, that they actually have this as part of kind of their onboarding. So that's kind of the next step what we're doing at the moment.
It's great to hear. How do you think? I know you mentioned the team is a little bit leaner than it has been in the past, and that's commonplace right now across talent acquisition teams all across the industry. As teams are getting leaner, they're getting more efficient. They're, to your point, focusing more on upskilling everybody to be more generalist than specialist, so you can cover more ground with a leaner team. How do you think that plays into the amount you need to invest into hiring managers to make them an extension of your team, right? As a leaner team, naturally you might feel a little bit more under-resourced or, not have as much capacity as you used to have. And therefore I could see it being really important to bring hiring managers. Like you need them to be part of the process to accomplish all the things that you want. Do you see it in a similar way?
Yes, I do. I think I've listened to some of the other awesome podcasts you have, and in terms of they take the hiring manager on a journey, right? And the hiring teams. I think it's a challenge of in terms of the pressure that's on the business in terms of just pushing the direction forward, but also being still accountable for recruitment as a hiring manager and a hiring team. I think sometimes that's difficult to balance, and I think that's probably something we're looking at in the future a lot more. I've heard some great stories about kind of hiring team members that are really really part of the hardcore recruitment cycle. With us, they are, but it's once they kind of are in the process, in the workflow, is not yet the pre-side. Okay, we have now a requisition. Let's get everybody on board from the hiring manager side or hiring team side. It's really once we already get going. So that's kind of the next step. Is okay. Let's get the hiring teams involved earlier on, and be very creative about that as well. But again, we're working with different time zones, so sometimes that means that if we do these things, we do have to hit different sessions if we would have kind of sessions about these things. So but definitely in the kind of in the scope for 2024. And of course there's more and more interest as well from the hiring managers. We've seen a real shift in terms of how involved they are in the process. So it's also coming from them now, and I think that's the cool thing. They're saying and they're giving us a lot more feedback about okay, why this candidate may not be so much aligned to the role at the moment, but could be in the future. So our talent pool pipeline is actually huge now, and all because of that kind of feedback from the hiring managers. So that's probably a little bit of a different thing that we are doing to maybe some other organizations. So for example, last week I had 2 roles open. They already filled by people from in the talent pool, candidates from within the talent pool. So we don't really have to do anything. Just send out the offer and here they go. But that's because of that kind of collaboration more with the hiring manager a lot quicker.
That's amazing. What do you think is maybe one of the causes for that shift in hiring managers wanting more involvement in the process, wanting to be involved earlier in the process?
I think more say in terms of the people that come through, maybe more understanding of the people they require from a competency perspective, and that's probably also aligned to what we see in the market, right? I think if I look in my team, I know a lot better of what I need now, maybe than to what I needed a year ago, and I think that's the shift. I think we all see in our teams and our companies, and that really helps build those talent pools, right? When we can tag them, hey, this is a Java engineer, or this is a great, account manager, and we can come back to these candidates very quickly. Then, so yeah, it saves a lot of time and effort at the moment. So it's
Interesting.
pretty cool.
So it sounds like hiring managers are starting to understand, some of the best practices, like you said, tagging certain candidates that maybe didn't make it through this time, but would be a great fit when we have a future opening, and having them aware of those things, and consciously leaning into tagging and doing those certain things that helps build the talent pool is really what's leading to not only better results, and by them seeing those better results, it gets them, further bought into the process, like a cycle.
Yeah, and they are also more aware of, this might not be my team, but I know, there's an opening coming up in number 2 or number 3 team. Hey, why don't we push this candidate into that role? And again, yesterday we filled the role by just doing that, by just switching from one kind of role to another, and filling a role for September. So I think that's what we're starting to see. But I think they like this as well, right? This is it is helpful for them, but they can also feel that they're helping the candidates with this as well, and that's pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a sign that they truly are becoming an extension of the talent acquisition team. When they start to think about hiring and building the organization more holistically versus like, as a hiring manager, I've got tunnel vision on for the role I need to fill, and that's all that matters. But as you start tagging candidates for the future, they start pushing candidates over here because it might be a fit for this team that they know is going to need to hire. That's kind of like them serving, as additional recruiters, on the team. So it sounds like, because of the buy-in that you've got, you start to have a company that is thinking about hiring all the time versus hiring managers only thinking about it when they have a role to fill.
Yeah, and it allows us as well to get even better quality candidates, right? Because the hiring manager see, okay, actually this has such specialized skills. It could be really, really good for us for the future. And I think that's also so you see, it's almost the workforce planning side, which we're looking at in 2024, is you can see that happening with the hiring team. So I think that's pretty. An interesting shift as well, and it really helps us. But I think also a lot of the hiring teams understand the pressure on us as well, and they're just wanting to help. They're wanting to help us, they're wanting to help themselves, and they're wanting to help candidates. And I think that's probably very different to maybe a couple of years ago. Maybe this is a pandemic thing that just kind of switched everybody on. I don't know. I think it's a different mindset that we're seeing now than previous.
It's amazing. So you've mentioned 2024 and the future a couple times throughout this. Curious what's on your mind. What are the big goals for you and the team looking ahead?
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's definitely slow scaling within our company. And when I slow scaling, when I mean it's really, really focused on quality. So the skill sets, the competencies that we need for the organization in the future. Not so much what we currently need. It's really future focused. And we're looking to implement workforce planning from a hardcore perspective in terms of link to the financial cost of the business, the budgets, etc. But really thinking also what do we do from a hiring perspective? Also, what do we do internally from a retainment perspective and a succession perspective? So that's really our focus for definitely the first half of 2024, and we're slowly kind of preparing for that. And a lot of the projects we're working on as a team are actually focused around workforce planning.
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing. I love hearing about all the things that you guys are up to, and really appreciate you coming on.
Awesome. Thanks so much.